I had done quite a few night hoist missions, and I was the only one in our company that had. So I was off duty that night, probably midnight or so, and they came and woke me up and said that there was this particular first lieutenant who I didn't get along really well with anyway, and they were taking the hoist out of his helicopter and putting it into mine. And this is why I don't want to mention any names of anyone, but anyway, that kind of riled me a little bit. But I went out and got my crew. We were out at the aircraft, and our company commander came up, and he was a guy who held down an aviator slot but almost never flew. So he came out, and he had been drinking heavily.
Oh, no.
And he told my co-pilot, he says, "Get out, I'm going." And I just told him, "Sir, you can't go. You've been drinking." And he said again, "Get out. I'm going to go on the mission." And then the crew chief and the medic just flat said to me, and they called me around to the other side of the aircraft and said, "If he goes, we're not going." So I just told my co-pilot, "Put your stuff back in, you're going." He's not. So we left him, and I thought surely there would be some trouble about that, but it was never mentioned, it was never brought up again. But how could he, because he was so totally in the wrong. So we went out and did the hoist mission, and it was a bad one too. Under fire, way out in the dark.
So that means you're hovering, you're dropping.
We're hovering over the jungle, dropping they call it a jungle penetrator. It was a device probably, I don't know, a foot or 16 inches across and maybe 3 feet tall, and it had some seats on it that folded down and some like seat belts. So they would just seat the wounded guys on them and strap them on it. Wow. It was a horrible ride. I mean, I would have to be hurt really bad before I accepted a ride on that.
So would they stay on that the whole time?
They lifted them. We lifted them up
into the copter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the medic had a control in his hand, and he looked out, and he could see down. When we came into the pickup point, we had both a landing light and a searchlight. So the landing light, we would point straight ahead of us, and we would settle the aircraft into the trees till we had basically the nose in a tree. So and the landing light was shining into the tree, and that would give us visual reference, to control the aircraft by. And then the searchlight would be pointed down, so our medic could see where the jungle penetrator was at and where the friendly guys on the ground were, and could kind of talk them through putting the wounded on there if they needed it.
How high up are you usually when you're doing these?
Well, it varied anywhere from 20 feet to, we had a 300-foot reach on the cable. I don't think I ever did one at 300 feet, but that particular mission was on the side of a really steep mountain, and so it was probably, I'm going to guess, 150 feet.
Oh my gosh.
And it takes a long time.
People shooting at you while you were doing that, or no?
Well, there was some fire as we came in, but Spooky showed up, which was a DC-3 with the miniguns. Okay. Nobody wanted to shoot when Spooky was there. But he started dropping flares for us, and we made one circle of the pickup site, and then the flares went out. They quit dropping flares, and we just went in as soon as we had it in sight, and we just went in by ourselves then. But he was circling up above, and everybody, the enemy knew that he was there.
So they just mellowed out.
They did not want to risk it. Yeah, my name is Jerry Ewan. I live in Grable, Wyoming. I was born and raised on a ranch about 15 miles east of here, and lived out there for most of my life. My dad sold the ranch in 1973, but kept a little piece of it, and we built a house out there 28 years ago now, and lived out there. I just loved it.
Yeah.
Great place to live, quiet. Had a great view of the mountains, see the elk in the wintertime, and the deer had come into the yard, and just a great place to be. And then...
You ended up in Vietnam.
Yeah.
How'd you end up there?
Well, that was the time when young men had to face the draft. So my first year or year and a half out of high school, I was in college, so I had a college deferment. And I kind of ran out of money, and I was a very uninspired student. So I just decided, let's go get it over with. So I went to see the recruiter, one jump ahead of the draft board, and said, what have you got that does not include carrying a rifle and a rice paddy? So one of the things that he offered was flight school. And I already had a friend, like I said, who had gone through flight school a year ahead of me and had graduated and already spent his year in Vietnam. So what I knew about helicopters, I knew from him, other than, we used to see them fly over now and then, because there was a little company out here at the airport, South Bighorn County Airport, that had some small helicopters, and we'd see them, and I thought, it looked pretty cool. So I took a battery of tests. I went to Denver, I think, 3 times, and first was a physical, and then there was a psychiatric evaluation, and then the third, I had to appear before a board of military officers that asked me a number of questions about, to me it was really random stuff, but they wanted to know.
Like what? What were the questions?
Well, one of them asked, that one of the questions was, why do you think we're in Vietnam? And, another one was, what do you think the biggest problem in America is right now? And
where'd you answer to those?
Well, I thought the biggest problem was racism. I didn't think it was communism. But there was a black colonel sitting on this board, and I had no idea how he would accept that answer. But I answered it truthfully, and I thought, that was the time when the issue was just really beginning to come out.
Yeah.
And he didn't seem to have any response, but I did pass the board.
How long were you in there with the board?
I don't really remember. It doesn't feel like it could have been very long.
Yeah. Maybe
15 or 20 minutes at the most.
And then how long after that did you find out you were accepted?
Immediately.
Really? Wow.
Mm-hmm. Within a day or two.
And were you excited about that?
I was. A little bit of, excitement, but a little bit of trepidation also, because...
and this was 68?
This was 67.
67. So was there a lot of anti-war sentiment going on, or was that before that?
It had just started.
Okay.
There wasn't a lot going on at that time, but everybody knew what was going on in Vietnam as far as the casualties. And
was it on the news all the time?
It was on the news. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I had a little bit of anxiety about it. But I was really eager to start flight school. But so it was what they called the enlisted option, that I enlisted. And if I went past these battery of tests, then I was guaranteed at least a slot to start flight school. And we lost about 60% or 70% of the guys who started.
They washed out?
They washed out.
What was the required of you?
Well, the first 100 hours, start with the beginning, I guess. The first 25 hours, you had to have soloed, and you had to have passed all of the classroom tests. And the other flight requirements, you had to be able to perform an auto rotation hands off by the instructor. And
explain to people who don't know what an auto rotation is.
Well, an auto rotation is a landing without engine power. So get over the stage field, which has some short runways on it, and just cut the power back on the engine to flight idle, and put the collective down, and it kind of glides. The air coming up from underneath keeps the rotor spinning just like a windmill, and then it usually has enough inertia for one pitch pull, so you get one chance to make a good landing.
It sounds like you'd be puckered up when you're making this landing the first
Well,
few times.
the first couple times, yeah, because it just scares you to death. Like this isn't possible. But then, after doing 100 of them or so, I got pretty comfortable with it, even as a student.
Yeah. Did you feel like you just took to it right away? The whole thing?
I did.
Yeah.
When I graduated from flight school, I was the number one graduate in my
Wow.
class. And that was after just about flunking out of college, which I was totally uninterested in. But it was my flight grades that kept me at the top of the class, because my flight grades were excellent all the way.
Okay, so
Classroom grades were okay. They were all good, but they weren't first by any means.
And you trained for how long before they sent you over there?
It took about almost a year, because I entered the Army in March and then of '67, and I graduated at the end of March in '68, and then went to Vietnam from there.
It wasn't like the helicopter training. It wasn't like basic training. They weren't berating you all the time.
They were.
They were.
There was a lot of harassment. The drills or the TAC officers get in your face and scream at you, and it's all part of the game.
Yeah.
They want to see how you react to pressure.
Yeah.
And flight school put a lot of pressure on us too, because we knew that if we flunked out of flight school, we belonged to the Army, and they would put us wherever they wanted us, with very little. We had very little say in it.
So there was some extra incentive to be good.
Yeah. Besides that, nobody wants to fail. And by the time we had gone through pre-flight, which took a month, and then finally got to fly, everybody was really, really hyped, really pumped up to start to fly and to get through it.
Describe the first time you actually flew by yourself in one of those things.
By myself? Well, I had about 12 hours of dual instruction, that is time with the flight instructor, and finally we landed at the stage field, and he just says, "Well, I'm getting out now. I think you can handle it." So I felt really good. I mean, it was exciting. It was intense. I got out. I made 3 trips around the traffic pattern and got out, and I felt 10 feet tall, I can really do this. But the very first time I ever had my hands on all the controls at once, I thought, this is impossible. There's no way anybody can do this. But it came together very quickly. I had a good instructor, and besides that, I loved it.
There's a unique feeling being in a helicopter. I feel like it's adrenaline inducing.
It is
a
indeed.
lot of power, and talk about that a little bit from somebody who's done it for so long. Well,
I think the adrenaline factor kind of went away for the most part, after the first few hours, and then the rest of the way through flight school, it was just a lot of hard work. It was a lot of study, and especially instrument training. We went to Fort Rucker for that in Alabama, but it just takes so much focus, and you've got all these details to track at the same time. And it's hard work, and it takes a lot of emotional or mental effort. So the adrenaline factor kind of begins to disappear, but it comes back again in combat.
So are they training you specifically to do medical evac?
No.
Just general helicopter stuff?
No, it was general helicopter. As a matter of fact, my first orders were to go to the 4th Infantry Division in Pleiku, and I had a month's leave, but they were so short of helicopter pilots at that time that they dropped my leave to 2 weeks, but that is between flight school and boarding for Vietnam, and sent me over unassigned. They dropped my orders for the 4th Infantry Division too, which I probably would have been like a slick driver, just to carry people and supplies. But I got to the 90th Replacement Battalion in Long Binh, and I went, and they had this big long barracks, and I hadn't slept really since I left America. So I went and laid down, and I wasn't there very long, and somebody came and got me and said, "We got orders for you." So I went in to see the sergeant that was handing out the orders, and he gave me a set of orders, and it said 44th Med Brigade. I go, what's that? What's 44th Med Brigade? He says, have you ever heard of medevac or Dustoff? I says, yeah. I thought that was supposed to be a voluntary assignment, which it was. He says, yeah, you just volunteered. And then he said, but you can get out of it if you want. So I asked him, what would the alternative be? He said, you can go directly to the 1st Cav, who also had a bad reputation for being in nasty stuff all the time. And I thought about that for just a half a second, and I just told him, I'll play the card that was dealt. I'll go to Dustoff. And it was the best decision, because I spent my whole year there, and I never pulled the trigger except playing down at the rifle range. And I didn't have to shoot anybody, and we were always on a mission of mercy to save lives. And of course, the adrenaline was there in that, especially when people start shooting at you.
Tell me about when you first landed in Vietnam. What was that like?
Well, they opened the windows or the door of the airplane, and the air is just heavy, and it smells bad, and laying over kind of off to the side of the taxiway, there's a row of metal coffins, and there's these guys. They're going home, getting on the airplane, and they're all hollering at us cat calls. You'll be sorry.
So it was all humid. Was it humid? Was it jungly where you were, or no?
Jungle? Well, we traveled a lot. So
yeah, but I mean when you landed there.
No, it was Long Bin Airport.
Oh, okay.
And we landed in just a really wide open, it was the busiest airport in the world at that time. So the security was pretty good. Although we got onto a bus to go from the airport to the replacement center, and the bus had wire screens, big heavy metal grate kind of things on the windows. And somebody said that was to keep people from throwing grenades into the bus. Then I started thinking, what have I got myself into?
So how soon before you were shipped out into that next assignment, the first assignment?
I was probably in Long Bin for less than a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
They fly you to the next destination?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have C-130s that went all over Vietnam, so they gave me orders for this one particular flight that was going to Quy Nhon. So I went to Quy Nhon on the C-130, and an aircraft from the 498, the helicopter, came to get me because their airfield was Lane Army Airfield, and it was about 15 miles from Quy Nhon. So this helicopter with the big red crosses came flying in to pick me up.
And what helicopter were you going to fly?
That one.
What's it called?
A Huey UH-1H model. And the one that came to get me and had great big red crosses, one on the nose and one on each rear door and then one underneath. And I just thought it was the coolest thing.
You were hyped up about it.
I was. Yeah, and I got in, and here these two guys up front that were flying it, and the crew chief and medic were in the back, and they were just kind of ignoring me because I was just an FNG at that point. But
FNG?
That means a effing new guy. That was part of the military speak at that time.
There you go.
But one of them, the aircraft commander in the left seat, he was a guy that I flew with a lot later on, but he had this great big handlebar mustache. And I could see both sides of this handlebar mustache from the back, sticking out the sides of his helmet.
So when you landed in camp, what was that like? Where were you going to stay?
Well, don't remember a lot about that, except the company area. It was a big facility, Lane Army Airfield. There was the 498th Med Company with their 25 Hueys or so, and then there was a lift company out of there with probably the same number, and there was also a heavy lift company there, Chinooks, and there was a gunship company there too.
Wow.
So it was a really busy place. Plus, security was provided by the North Korean or South Koreans. So it was very secure. The South Koreans, they didn't take any crap off anybody. If they received fire from a village, they figured there were no friendlies there, so they just went in and killed everybody.
Wow.
And so we never had any trouble there. But our facilities there were hard-sided barracks, no air conditioning, of course, but concrete floor. And by that time, I hadn't slept hardly any since I left the States. So I went up to, they assigned me a room in the barracks and assigned me to the 4th platoon. And I went up that evening and I went to sleep, went to bed. And the next morning, I didn't wake up. So the company commander showed up and he shook me and he said, "Mr. Ewan," they called us Mr. as warrant officers. He said, "Around here we get up and go to work in the morning." Said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll be right there."
What was your first flying assignment there?
Well, the very first flying that I did was with the company standardization pilot, and we went out and did a local area checkout, and we shot some auto rotations and just the standard maneuvers. And
he was just trying to check you out.
Yeah, he just checked me out. It's part of the unit procedure.
Yeah.
Any new pilot, he had to check them out. We'd already graduated from flight school, so probably not too many people ever flunked that check ride. But and then I flew with him the next night, doing
on an assignment,
night missions. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I only remember one of them. We went over to the Korean compound, which was, 2 or 3 miles away. And they had a wounded soldier that we picked up. They had probably been out on patrol or something and been in contact. And the thing I remember about that, it was all the wires in the air that crisscrossed everywhere. And how the captain, who was the IP, how much he stressed watching for those wires. Every place in Vietnam wasn't like that, though.
Yeah.
But there were a few places, and so he just kind of formed a sixth sense, of watching for wires.
Yeah.
And then I think the first field site I ever went to was a place called Duc Pho, and it was probably 70 miles north of our main base, and we kept 2 helicopters there, and we just took turns taking missions. No days off there.
Wow.
So we'd be there from 10 days to 2 weeks, rotate back to base.
And in a given day, how many missions would you fly?
Well, it just really varied depending on the action going on and where we were. I flew over 1,100 missions in a year, so the average would have been almost 4 a day.
4 a day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, give me some highlights. What are some of the things that you remember?
Of missions, you mean? One of them I remember for flying a mission for the Koreans in the Phuket Mountains, which were about 15 miles between Lane Field and the sea. And it basically a big jumble of rocks. It was just, it wasn't as real big as mountains go here, but there were no places to land. So there was always this language barrier working for the Koreans. So we flew up there, and I had a brand new co-pilot with me. I'd been there for a while myself at that time. And we had a Korean interpreter in the back too. And his job was to interpret with the Koreans and keep the pilots informed as to what was going on, to get the wounded put onto the jungle penetrator. And we spent 45 minutes at a hover there. Well, the Koreans talked back and forth, and we had no idea what was going on.
So you're sitting there trying to hold the copper steady?
Just holding it steady, and I'd tell Tommy, our interpreter, he was an American and part of our unit, and tell me what's going on, will you? And he just ignored me.
But it worked out? You got those guys out?
It worked out. Mm-hmm. And the guy that was with me, it was his first day in country, and As soon as we cleared the LZ, I told him, "You got it." And I looked over at him, and his eyes were about as big around as dollars. And he said, "Is it always like this?" No, it's not always like this. Some days it's worse.
What's the scariest situation you feel like you were in?
You know, there were a lot of times under fire when I was afraid. But I do remember one particular mission flying out of Chulai. That was the second unit that I flew with. And there was this area called Tin Phuc, which was maybe 15 or 20 miles to the northwest of us out in the mountains. And we had gone out there. No, let me back up. This wasn't at Tin Phuc. This was along the highway north of Chulai where this happened. But we came in for the pickup and hadn't taken any fire. And it was the LZ, the landing zone, was located in the rice paddies at the edge of a big heavy stand of timber.
Yeah. And
then there was the Highway 1, and it wasn't that far from where we landed to where the highway was. But anyway, when we were sitting in the LZ, we started taking fire from behind us. And so right away, the options started going through my mind, what to do, how to get out of here. And one of them was to go straight up and clear the trees, and the other one is just to do a pedal turn and go back straight against the enemy fire, and that wasn't very attractive. And so
Did you have the wounded on board already?
We had him loaded by then.
Okay.
So I looked ahead of me, and I see these gaps in the trees. So I thought, with a little airspeed, I can get through them. You know, I can get some airspeed, and I can tip sideways and slip between the trees, and made it on the first two. But because of my inexperience, what I didn't realize is how much airspeed that I would lose by tipping the aircraft on its side. So when we got to the second set of trees, I had to level the aircraft, or it would have fallen out of the air. So we hit the tree, and we hit it so hard. The command and control helicopter was above us, and he said that we dislodged so much dust from that tree that he thought we'd crashed, and then we flew out of the other side of it. But
so the blades hit the tree.
The blades hit the tree.
Wow, and they didn't split apart.
No, it didn't. But
Wow.
But after we cleared the area, there was a little bit of vibration, and the crew chief says, "I think we better stop and look at see what's wrong." But we had patients in the back, and we were in enemy territory. I just said, "Heck no, I'm not stopping here." So we went ahead and went to the hospital and unloaded, and then back to the company area. And the maintenance sergeant, after we landed and he went to look the helicopter over, he called me back out to the ramp and says, "I want you to see something here." And out of the 4 transmission mounts, 2 of them were broken and a third one was cracked.
Wow.
And that was probably about as close as I came to dying on any mission.
So the impact of the trees.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we hit it hard.
Wow.
I'll bet it was probably 4 to 6 inches.
Wow.
It's a wonder that, everything didn't fail right at that spot.
Did you ever have a helicopter malfunction on you?
In Vietnam, we'll just let that go.
Yeah, let that go.
Kathy will probably pick it up.
What are the blades made out of? Are they fiberglass?
They're
composite.
Composite. Yeah, they have a skin on the top and the bottom, and then there's a honeycomb material between the top and bottom skin, and then the leading edge is a spar. It's probably alloy, aluminum, titanium alloy,
Yeah.
and it's really strong. But and I remember trying to reach some wounded that day. We did not have a hoist, and they were in a rice paddy or a bamboo thicket. So just lowering down and cutting the bamboo off, to where we could reach them.
Yeah.
And we got back, and there was no vibration or anything, but there were slices in the bottom of the blade. They were ruined because what I didn't understand, didn't know, was that in this bamboo there's old dried stalks, and they're very hard and very sharp, and that's what cut the blades.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go ahead. Keep going.
Go ahead.
We were talking about its malfunctions over there.
Yeah, and I don't, that Huey is so reliable, and medevac had first priority on machines, so we always had new machines. If we had a helicopter that had 500 hours on it, we thought it was old, when actually it's just barely broke in.
Was that kind of the cherry thing to do in helicopters? Was the medevac stuff? Would you say? Was it looked at as being kind of a higher status than the regular helicopter dudes?
Oh, I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, it was all, you balance it all out. We were all kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You go out and support the ground troops. That's what we did.
And in a given day, what's a day? What's the most missions you did in one day? Do you remember?
I don't remember the number of missions, but I remember I put 15 hours on an aircraft in one day.
Wow.
And that takes the whole day, because you don't count the time when you're sitting on the ground. It's just when you're actually flying. So it was a long day. I remember I was exhausted.
Wow. And I guess you saw a lot of really hard stuff.
Well, yeah, of course, because we were always picking up the wounded. That's the kind of thing that stuck with me, I think, the most, and some of the things that gave me the most problems, especially the children that got in the way of the war. For instance, one day we were on standby at this place called Dustoff, and we got a call from the operations that there had been an explosion in the minefield. It was reported by one of the guards,
mm-hmm.
and that there were some children out there. So they sent us out to look. They said it would take too long to get there on the ground, so they sent us out to see if we could find out what happened. And there was this one real little child laying on the ground.
Oh,
and what had happened is they'd been out there playing in the minefield, and she had tripped a tripwire to a claymore, most likely what it was, but it cut both of her little legs off below the knee. And we got close enough. First of all, the operations told me that there was no requirement for us to do that, to hover down and pick her up. But we wanted to, because, it's a child. So my medic on the right side of the helicopter was leaning out, getting ready to reach down and pick her up. And the crew talks to you all the time. You're doing something like that.
You're just hovering barely over the ground.
Just barely hovering down, getting a little closer and a little closer. Yeah. And I could hear him start to cry. And he picked up that little girl, and I remember looking back in the back and seeing her laying on a stretcher with her legs, a traumatic amputation to both legs. And I still see that sometimes. That's the kind of thing that just does not leave you, especially when my own children begin to be about that age. The hardest things to bear.
What are some other experiences that stand out in your mind?
Well, I remember one day, a couple really, but one day we were called out to outside of Dustoff to a place where a Jeep had hit a landmine, and what they would do is take an unexploded 500-pound bomb, and they would bury it in the intersection of a road, and it would be command detonated. It had a wire that led out to a detonator somewhere, and wait till there was a vehicle on top of it, and then they would blow it, and that's what happened. So we went out there, and this Jeep was part of a convoy, as I remember it. And there was this guy laying there on the ground, and his his friends, or the guys that were with him, would not go pick him up because his legs were blown off and his arms were blown off. There was just his torso and his head and his torso all cut up. And our medic, who was very experienced, he'd been in Vietnam for several tours, started out as a ground medic. We put him on board, and he just said, "Sir, I'm going to start an IV in him so his veins will open up and he can bleed out and he can die." So that's what he did.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So did he just you dropped him down in there? Or did he do that?
We landed.
Picked him up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We landed, and he went over and picked him up, put him on the helicopter.
How often were you able to land versus having to basket people up or put the thing down there?
Most of the time we were able to land, but I don't know how many hoist missions I did in Vietnam. I'm going to guess 20 to 30 maybe in a year. So most of them we could land for.
Yeah. And then if there was a heavy fighting going on, did you avoid that place? You had to get them. They had to evacuate out of that area, or what happened there?
It depended. It depended on the condition of the patients. If they could wait a little while, then we'd wait for gunship support or artillery support, or I even called on guard a time or two and got fighter jets to support. To come through, and once they make a pass or two, the enemy would keep their heads down. I remember at one time this is another mission that came to mind, the same medic that started the IV so the guy could die. Yeah. We were flying out of Tuiwa that day, and we'd flown up the river, I don't know, 15 or 20 miles or maybe a little more, and it was an urgent mission, which meant loss of life is imminent. So we rushed up there, and we were probably 2 minutes out from landing, and the guy on the ground called me, and he said, "No rush anymore, Dustoff. Our WIA just became KIA, which means he died." And my medic just kept saying, "Get me to him, get me to him, get me to him." So we landed, and he ran over there with his ambu bag, and I don't know what all he took with him, but anyway, he got him started again.
Wow.
And we took him back to the hospital at Tuiwa, and he lived.
Wow. Sounds like that guy was pretty amazing. You're a medic.
He was a good medic. Yeah, he was one of those guys that just, I don't know how many tours he'd done in Vietnam, but he just couldn't leave it. You've heard of the Battle of Ia Drang Valley?
No.
LZ X-ray?
Okay.
It was the movie that We Were Soldiers Once and Young was based on.
Okay.
And you may not remember the second part of that story was after the Battle of LZ X-ray was over. The unit that came in to support that unit, when they were flown out, instead of evacuating them from that spot, they made a march over to another LZ they called Albany. And during that march, the NVA ambushed them, and they killed most of them, most of that company. And this medic was there, and he hid under the bodies of a couple of his friends while the NVA went around and shot his friends in the head.
Oh,
and there was nothing he could do about it. So he was an angry young man, but an extremely good medic.
Wow. How many times did he serve over there?
I don't know. Rounds? He had been there from 1960. LZ X-ray, I think, happened in 65. Mm-hmm. And when I was at the unit in 68, he was still there when I left the unit. So I don't know.
And you were 21?
21.
Flying over there.
Mm-hmm. But his name is not on the wall. And we have tried to find him.
So as far as you know, he lived?
As far as I know, he lived. And
how often were copters getting shot down or medevacs having problems? Was that a thing, or was that not a thing?
Yeah, it happened. The unit, my second unit, just before I got there, they lost 2 aircraft with everybody on board. That's 4 pilots and 4 crew members.
For enemy fire, or? accidents?
One of them was enemy fire, and one of them was I don't think they ever figured it out for sure. I think the general consensus was that they had tried to put too many patients on and were unable to lift over the trees coming out.
What was your flying over there? What was your biggest fear, or what were you always concentrating on the most? Was there a particular thing as the pilot?
Not really, because there's so many things that you have to be aware of. But if I had a fear over there, it was being in a crash and burning to death, because helicopters always burn when they crash.
That would not be a good way to go.
Oh, nope. And I was going to tell you about another mission that was particularly, I don't know, it moved me because of the way it had developed. We were supporting the Americal Division northwest of Chulai, out at this really bad area. There was a reinforced heavy weapons battalion of NVA dug in out there. So we went out to do a medevac, and we got there, and the officer probably on the ground said, we need you to wait a little while, because we need to cross this rice paddy and cross a tree line, so it'll be safe enough for you to land and for us to get out to load you. So we watched them as they started out across that tree line, and I did not see it, but one of my crew members said that he saw a pair of rockets go into this group of soldiers, and it just decimated them. So the officer came back on the radio, and he said, I can't really ask you to come in, but we really need you right now. So I asked the crew, what do you say? We'll take a vote. If there's one no, we'll wait until they get it stabilized. And everybody said yes. And I was certain at that point, when I started that approach, I was not going to live through it. That's how bad it was on the ground.
You thought you were going to get shot down?
I thought I was going to die on it, yeah.
Yeah.
But
What happened?
Well, I planned out the approach path so I could fly down this gully between trees and come out into this rice paddy and just try to minimize the exposure, which I did. Came out into the rice paddy and did a really hard flare and a hard stop, and loaded the patients very quickly, went out the same way, and we never took a round.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How many guys could you carry on your helicopter when you were...
Well, we would carry, usually we had only one or two or three, but Americans, we could probably take 7 or 8. I remember one mission for the Special Forces. It was an A-team that was out in the mountains quite a ways west of Chulai. And they were in this big canyon, a big wide canyon, probably half a mile wide and several hundred feet deep. And he said they had been running from the enemy all day. And the Special Forces, there were 3 of them, and one of them had been killed, and they had lost all of that company except for 11.
Wow.
And he said, I know you're not supposed to take people that aren't wounded, but could you take us all out? And I said, as long as you can get on here, we'll take you out. So we did. We jam-packed them on there, and it was extremely heavy. But as we came in, we took fire from both sides of that canyon. And then in the bottom of it, there was rice paddies. They were just stepped.
Uh-huh.
And so had just enough light to see a little bit out, of the terrain. And just before I landed, turned the landing light on for maybe, 3 to 5 seconds, picked a spot, landed there, loaded them up, and turned around, and out we went.
Wow.
And, we got back to Chulai, and this was in the middle of the night, and the Special Forces captain, he was wounded. He got out of the helicopter, and he walked around to the front, and he opened my door. I was in the left seat, and I thought, maybe the guy's going to punch me in the nose for taking so long or something. I didn't know. But he grabbed my hand and took my sleeve and kissed it.
Wow.
I always wanted to find that guy, because that was a pure gesture of thanks. He appreciated it.
What did you took R&R?
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? You said it was hard getting away. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we went to Hawaii. We met in Hawaii. Kathy was able to get
This
tickets.
is your wife, but you weren't married at the time, right?
Yeah, we were married.
Oh, you were? Okay.
We got married when I was in flight school.
Okay, so you were married when you went over there. Wow.
Yeah, so we spent 5 days together. She was able to get either a free or a reduced fare ticket, and it was fun. We took the military had some tours set up, and so we did all the tourist sightseeing stuff, and basically we were just together. We were newlyweds.
Yeah.
Because we got married in September, and then I left for Vietnam the next April.
Wow.
First of all, it was hard to leave the unit, and then when it was time to leave Hawaii, it was hard to leave her, but it was hard to stay there too during those 5 days, because my friends were out there flying missions, and I felt like my job was to be there, and it was that same way when it was time to come home too. It was hard to leave. They had to stay, and I felt like I should be there to support them.
Yeah. And how did you sort through that when you got home?
Well, at that time, I went back to Fort Walters, and became an instructor.
Okay.
And so I had other guys to talk to, and we all had a common experience. We were young people. We'd spent a year in Vietnam. A lot of us were married, and we had a lot of small children. So we had a peer group that was very, very easy to talk to.
Yeah.
But the hard times came after I got out of the Army, especially when I left the helicopters that I loved, and I was out of the Army. In the Army, when they take you in, and especially to a program like flight school, they take your old identity and they rebuild a new identity. And the new identity is Vietnam helicopter pilot. And there's no call for that anymore.
Yeah.
But finally, when I went back to flying, then it was like a piece of me came home.
So when you came home, you went to work. You said you went to work for
Ross Perot.
Ross Perot.
Mm-hmm.
Not flying, but doing
computer work.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was recruiting young officers off the military base because we fit into his system, which basically was a military type system.
Because what did Ross do? It was some kind of
computers. He was instrumental in starting the first banking computer system.
Oh.
And see, we did banking, we did life insurance. And then
did you actually meet him?
Oh, yeah.
Was he a character?
He kind of was, but he didn't really have time for people who were less than he was, you know what I mean?
Had he run for president by this point or no?
No, that was after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many years did you work for his company?
1.5 years.
Okay.
And then I worked for another company, Compass Computer Services in Dallas. And they were much better. I was able to take what I'd learned at Ross Perot's company, Electronic Data Systems, and put it to better work. Use. Yeah, because I went through his programming school, and his guarantee was that if it was self-taught, if you did that, you could be a computer programmer, and that's where the best money was in the company. But what I found out was that was not true, because what he didn't say, and nobody would actually say, was that you needed a college education, a degree also.
Oh.
And I didn't have one.
Oh.
So he wouldn't advance me. But I went to the second company, and it was a lot better.
I want to go back. The copter that you flew. Give me the specs on it. How much fuel would it hold? How fast did it go? How fly did it?
The Huey would hold about 1,500 pounds of fuel, and It would fly 120 knots, and it had an engine that had 1,350 horsepower. My approaches, like especially to an insecure LZ, I would end up the approach going extremely fast, but we'd start them about 1,500 feet above the ground, and I'd gradually slow the airspeed until just before I lost translational lift, which is almost like a stall in an airplane, but about 20 miles an hour, and then dump the collective all the way down and tip the nose over and spiral down and get 2,500 foot a minute descent or more.
Wow. And just to get in there really quickly.
Build airspeed.
Yeah. And
then get close to the ground, level out, and might be going 100 or 120 knots, and then get close to the LZ and just a hard side flare, the kind that makes your cheeks sag.
It must have been a real rush doing that.
It was.
Were everyone else freaking out on the helicopter while you were doing that?
When they first saw me doing it, they would.
Is that just something
they got used to it?
Is that something they taught you, or is that something that was your style?
I learned it from some of the older or the more experienced aircraft commanders at the 498th.
Yeah.
One in particular he was a crazy guy, but he was a good pilot, and he would push the limits.
Well, doing a lot of film stuff, I've been on a lot of shoots with helicopters. And all the best guys were former Vietnam copter pilots.
Yeah, when I was working for Hawkins and Powers, we did a lot of seismograph work, and always moving seismograph equipment and juggies, they call them, guys that carried the equipment up and down the line. And they'd get in every once in a while and say, "Hey, man, give us a ride." So, okay, here you go. They always loved it.
Okay, so you're out. You've done 2 computer jobs, and then you started flying again. Tell me about that.
Well, I was really glad to get back to it. And my first job that I took for Hawkins and Powers took a helicopter to Wounded Knee, South Dakota, the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1973.
Okay.
And we were contracted to the FBI, and we would change the guard. They had a number of facilities they called roadblocks all the way around the little village of Wounded Knee. So we would change the guard on them a couple times a day, and we'd fly patrols looking for people going in and out, and they pretty much came and went at will anyway. But but one day the FBI gave me a guy that was supposed to be experienced to fly with me, and we were sitting at one of those roadblocks, and there was a line of automatic weapon fire hit the ground right in front of us. I mean, within 15 or 20 feet. Bullets kicking up dust, and he turns to me and says, "What was that?" And I was trying to get the RPM up so we could leave. He really didn't know how close we'd come. But they had a firefight a number of times. One time they had a firefight going on, and all at once somebody was hit. Somebody in the village, one of the Indians was hit in the head, and it was like, "Oh, wait a minute, we got to stop. Somebody got hurt." So they stopped everything, and they were talking back and forth. What are we going to do with this wounded guy? And the people in the village wouldn't bring him out, and the FBI and U.S. Marshals wouldn't go into him. So I just said, "I'll go get him. That's what I do." So, "Are you sure? You don't have to do that." "Yeah, I'm sure." So I just went by myself, and
just you,
just me.
Wow. No one. You couldn't get anybody else to go with you.
Nope. So I went in there, and they actually had a doctor that flew with us, and we took this guy all the way to Rapid City. He died, unfortunately, but.
Wow. Did you feel safe landing in there?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure they weren't going to bother me, because after all, it was their guy, and we're trying to save his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't have any problems with it.
Yeah. I want to talk about pilot co-pilot in the situation when you were over in Vietnam. What is that? What is the duties of that? How does the co-pilot and the pilot work together?
There's the aircraft commander is one of the pilots, and he's responsible for all the decisions made about what the aircraft does on the missions.
Yeah.
And the aircraft commanders fly the most difficult missions, and the co-pilot basically he's there to assist. He reads instruments. He tunes radio frequencies at the right time. And on an approach, especially if it was insecure, he'd have his hands on the controls. So if the pilot was shot, he could take over, which did happen from time to time. And he was training. He was training to become an aircraft commander himself.
What was while you were there? Or were you just too busy doing stuff? Was there talk about the war and how it was going? Was that a thing, or was that out there? Was it just too much? Everyone was in the thick of it at that point to really, everyone was just busy doing stuff.
I don't remember a lot of talk about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I remember once in a while somebody might say, well, it's a dirty little war, but it's the only one we've got. But I don't think overall, I don't think there were a lot of real vocal supporters.
It just was what it was. It was just going. It was on autopilot at that point.
We had a job to do, and we did it.
Yeah.
And it was obvious to most of us, I think, that after we'd been there a while, is that what we were doing wasn't working.
Yeah. Yeah.
We weren't winning the hearts and minds of the people.
Yeah.
Not when a rich guy might be rich because he has one water buffalo. Yeah. And somebody shoots him from a helicopter.
Yeah.
You don't make friends doing that. And the enemy would come in, and if they found people that were supporting the Americans, they just shoot them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah. Okay, now let's get back. So, you did that the thing with the FBI, and then you started doing. What were the other stuff you did? You did a lot of fire.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that.
Fire work.
Yeah.
Well, the company would bid fire contracts, so we'd have a helicopter on a base somewhere for a specified length of time. And while we were there, we would have a water bucket that we would fill with water, dip in a lake or a stream, and take to the fire. Or we would take firefighters out with their equipment and haul in hoses and pumps and whatever they needed, and just keep them supplied, food.
Was that as exciting as Vietnam or no?
No, but it was intense.
Yeah.
It was kind of like the same thing, where you're supporting people on the ground, and we did a lot of law enforcement too, chasing after bad guys. And
oh, you got some good stories on that? You got anything good on that? Do you remember?
I do have some stories.
Oh, those sound interesting.
I did a contract up in Yellowstone Park, a fire contract one summer, and most of it was law enforcement, because people go to the park and they get crazy, they just do stupid stuff. But this one particular incident, somebody found a note in a box at the Heart Lake trailhead from this guy that said he was going into the woods with a .44 Magnum rifle. And he said he was going to shoot every bear that he saw. And at the end of this time, whatever it was going to be, if he shot more grizzly bears than black bears, America was going to win the war. What war, I don't know. And if he shot more black bears, then just the opposite, the Russians were going to win. So right away, we went out looking for him. We flew up and down the Heart Lake Trail and all over that country out there, and could not find him, of course. I mean, it's really easy to hide from somebody in the air. So we went back to Grant's Village, and we were sitting there and trying to figure out what to do next. And just I and my fuel truck driver, who is my mechanic also, were putting fuel in the helicopter, and here came this guy walking out of the woods, and he's got a 44 Magnum rifle over his shoulder. I called the park ranger, and I said, you guys better get over here right away.
Was that the guy?
That was the guy.
Did you say anything to him or no?
No, he just walked right by us.
That is
I was afraid to say anything to him because I was pretty sure that he was already crazy. So.
That is a crazy story.
It is. And then we one day caught some people doing these Baja rigs. They were popular in the
like
70s
dune buggy
and 80s.
kind of things?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they were climbing up and down the terraces at Mammoth Hot Springs with one of these machines. They were young guys, and they had a lot of money, and they had this fancy four-wheel drive vehicle, and they were just playing out there. And then, people get hurt all the time by getting too close to the buffalo. So, and then this other time, we got a call again from the Heart Lake Trailhead that there's some people that had found this girl that had been attacked by a grizzly bear, and she was really hurt bad. So I went and got the ranger and a doctor, and we flew across the lake, and she was easy to find. And what had happened, it was a young girl who had been working for the Park Service that summer, or for the whoever had the concessions, and she was on her day off, so she just was walking out in the woods taking pictures. And she found this old mother grizzly bear with 2 cubs, and then the mama bear disappeared, and she never gave it any thought until the mama bear circled around and attacked her from behind.
Oh, jeez.
And it tore a chunk of meat out of her butt about the size of a bear's bite, and bit her so hard in the chest she had sucking chest wounds. So we stabilized her and loaded her up in the helicopter and flew her back to the hospital.
Wow.
Yep.
It seems, Jerry, like you said you were an uninspired college student, but
yeah.
You found your inspiration.
I did.
With the helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you had a knack for flying it.
I did.
Did you always feel that way?
I felt like I did. Yeah, from the time I soloed on, I did well. I'm the only one I know in my flight school class that never got a pink slip for an unsatisfactory ride with the instructor.
That's pretty good.
And three pink slips, and you went up for a review, and they would either give you another chance or they'd wash you out.
Now, are you? You said you had a mechanical problem while you were after.
Mm-hmm.
Is that doing fire stuff, or what was that?
Well,
What's that story?
I had several, but one of them that really sticks out in my mind was, after I got back from Vietnam, I was a flight instructor at Fort Walters for a while, and then I moved into flight standards, flight evaluation. I gave check rides.
Okay.
So we were out on a check ride one day, and I had a young student with me, and we were in a Hughes TH-55, and it's a little tiny, it's a good trainer, but it's really small and it's flimsy. And the drive system that drove the tail rotor is a series of, they look like fan belts. That's what they are. Mm-hmm. And they've got an actuator, a pulley on an actuator, and it comes out electrically, and it tightens up these fan belts and engages the tail rotor and the main rotor. So we're on our way back, and we're almost back to the heliport, and there's a bang from the back. And the student has the helicopter, and I told him I've got it. So I discovered what I discovered. I entered auto rotation until I could figure out what the problem was. Every time I started to bring in a little power, rotor RPM would decay, and I couldn't get anything from the engine. So I called a Mayday, and we had a field ahead of us and a nice place. Made a nice touchdown auto rotation. I looked over at that student, and I'm pretty tense by that time, After all, it's a serious problem. And he's just sitting there smiling at me, and I said, "Weren't you scared?" He says, no, I knew you could handle it.
Did he go on to be a pilot?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And then while I was working for Hawkins and Powers, I had really good luck there, too, as far as mechanical failures go. I had one in the old Hiller, which is a 3-place machine, has a bench seat, and 3 people can sit on it. And the pilot usually sits in the middle. That day we were hunting coyotes on a government contract, the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll take that back. This was a private person that used to just hire us just because he was an old sheep rancher.
Yeah.
And he hated coyotes, and he had quite a bit of money. But anyway, we were out hunting coyotes and in this old Hiller, and we shot a coyote on the side of a canyon, deep snow, so I hovered by the coyote, and I had to let old Chet, his name was Chet, had to let him out, kind of wallow over to where the coyote was, and then when he got to it, then I was going to hover by, and he was going to put it in the basket, cargo basket, and then I was going to move off to a place I could land where he could get in.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting on a hill over there watching him, and he finally got to the coyote, so I started to twist on the throttle, and nothing happened. And so I shut it off and got to looking around, and the throttle linkage had fallen apart.
Oh, geez.
And there was just a pile of parts on the engine deck.
Oh, man.
But it happened while we were sitting there. Yeah.
Wow.
So I put it all back together, and because I knew how it worked, because I did spent quite a bit of time working on it while I worked there too. I didn't have any safety wire, but it didn't have any safety wire before. That's why it fell apart. Yeah. But we went straight home. So
you said you were pretty good at flying at night over in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
What was different about flying at night? What was kind of always top of mind when you were flying at night?
Well, for one thing, if you can't see the bad guys, they can't see you either. And I felt comfortable that way. And I liked the feel of the isolation with just the pilot and the machine, and reading the instruments and interpreting everything from them. I really liked that part of it. And I found that I could focus on a number of things at once and keep everything as it should be. The downside of that is if the engine did quit, you're pretty well stuck with where you're going to have to land. You couldn't see the ground, so you got close enough to where you could turn the light on and see something, and whatever you saw, that's what you had to deal with.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I never had that. But I did put that my ability to fly at night, I did put it to use a few times working for Hawkins and Powers. One time I went out in the mountains west of Cody, out there on the pretty close to Yellowstone Park. Actually, it was in the wilderness area, but this guy had gotten bucked off his horse, or the horse fell on him or something. But they called, and it was just almost dark, and I was home then. That's when we lived in Grable before, and called for a helicopter. So I went over there and picked up a surgeon who was also a good friend of mine, and we tried to get back into the mountains. And that old Hiller had no instruments in it at all. It was all visual reference.
Yeah.
So we started back there, and it was really, really dark. I told we were talking to a guy on the ground up there, and I told him, take out your flashlight and keep it shined at us and keep moving it around. And as long as I can see that light, I know there's nothing between you and me. So I started the approach, and sure enough, the light went out.
Oh.
And I called and said, did you just turn the light out? He said, no, we're still pointing it at you. So I had to pull up and back out, and we went down to the little airfield down by Wapiti. I don't know if you know where that is, but it's a community west of Cody, and shut down. And by this time it was middle of the night, and I knew that the moon was going to come up in an hour or so. So I just told them we'll wait. So finally the moon came up, a little sliver, but it was enough that we could see out the outline of the hills. And went back there.
Wow, that sounds sketchy.
It was sketchy, but I felt comfortable doing that because my night vision has always been good.
Wow.
And another time I think we were flying out of Cook City on a fire, not Cook City, Gardner, Montana. And we got a call late in the evening for a rescue above Red Lodge. So we went over there. I picked up a ranger who was also a EMT, and we went over there. And we just had a 206, or a Bell 206, right. And it had a really underpowered engine. It was one of the early ones. So we flew over there and found this canyon that comes into, I remember the creek. It's not Red Lodge Creek, but it comes down through Red Lodge and ends up, goes back into the Clark's Fork between here and Billings. Anyway, we found this girl and her husband, and they were right above this little lake, and there was absolutely no place to land. So I landed in the lake, probably a foot of water. Kind of adjusted around until I felt like it was solid and shut down, and we started down there, and the ranger was with me, and this guy's and this young lady's husband. So we started down there, and we got to her, and we checked her all out, and we started carrying her out of there. And the next thing that happened is the ranger dropped the flashlight. I could see it go tumbling down the snowdrift into the creek and shines for a second, and it's gone. So we were just kind of groping from that point on, and got up to the helicopter and loaded her up. And I told the young guy, I said, you can't go out with us, because we were loaded pretty heavy, and I didn't want anybody on there that wasn't necessary anyway, because it was so sketchy getting her out. And I asked the ranger, I said, he's an EMT, I said, the only way we're going to even try this is if you will tell me that you think she's going to die before morning. So he kind of hemmed and hawed around. He says, yeah, I think she might die before morning. So, okay, so, and it was all dark, but that machine also had a basic instrument panel. Yeah. So I kind of timed it. We picked it up and started out flew out over the big canyon. And I figured, I can't remember how many seconds I figured it would take us to get out over the big canyon. Then we'd make a 90-degree turn to the left and keep climbing. And pretty soon we saw Red Lodge down there. And by this time it was probably 1 or 2 in the morning.
Wow, jeez. Wow.
But we got her out of there.
I was going to ask you, did you see that the tourist helicopter that went down in New York? Did you see the tail had fallen apart? Did you see that in the news a few weeks ago?
I did. I watched that pretty close.
What did you make of that?
You know, there were a lot of people trying to guess at what could have happened. Yeah. And the truth is, the only thing we really knew is that the helicopter came apart and it crashed. Yeah. As far as what happened, it looked like a major failure of some sort.
Something malfunctioned, didn't it? Yeah.
And they talked about the mass hitting the tail boom. That's what causes the tail boom to separate like that, or the main rotor. But why it would do that? Yeah. I have no idea.
Okay. Do you think, I feel like the prevailing attitude is helicopter is a lot sketchier than an airplane. Do you feel like that's true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just by the nature of so many moving parts. And because of what they do. I've got airplane ratings too, all of them. And it just never really appealed to me that much. I mean, it's fun, but
The plane wasn't as fun as a
no,
helicopter.
not by any means. Because the helicopter, you're out there and you're making a landing and a takeoff every minute or two, especially with a long line, 100-foot line, and moving surveyors and seismographers up and down the seismograph line and all the stuff that you do. You're extremely busy.
Yeah.
But airplanes, I mean, you take off and you get to altitude and get everything all trimmed up. And you just sit there. That's how I felt about it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, now what do you got there?
This is it's a challenge coin, and I'll give you just a little bit of history, a little background about that. And that's not the official medal, but there was a congressional gold medal that was awarded by Congress to everyone who flew Dustoff and medevac in Vietnam, and that legislation passed last fall and was signed into law by the president.
Yeah.
So we have this medal that's coming to us, a congressional gold medal.
How
And
exciting
that's a challenge coin that was the Vietnam Dustoff Association designed for us to give out. It's not an official representation of the medal. It may take a year and a half for it to grind its way through the selection committee and the mint. They have to agree on a design, and the mint has to set up and mill it, and they're only going to produce one, and it's going to be a 3-inch and solid gold. And
wow.
They are going to make some smaller ones, 2 different sizes, and they're going to be brass like that one, and they'll be available for cost. But you could go ahead. Did you look at that?
Yeah, I did. That's great. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it called Dustoff? Tell me about that.
Well, there's a couple different stories about that, but it came from the original medevac unit in Vietnam, and I've heard that it stands for dedicated, unhesitating service to our fighting forces. But the Dustoff was around before the acronym, so I don't really know.
Huh.
It's something that it kind of grew in place, I guess.
Well, you helped a lot of people out over there.
We did, yeah. That's what made it such a great job.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I never had to pull a trigger. I didn't have to shoot anybody. We're always on a mission of mercy, and we saved a lot of lives.
You've been to the wall in D.C.?
Yes, I have.
What's that like for you? What was that like the first time you went
Well,
there?
the first time it was just it was overpowering, because I could not look at that wall and not feel just a little bit of the combined grief of over 57,000 families, mothers and fathers, and how many people, hundreds of thousands of people represented by those names. And the other thing is, those guys were so young. When I finally got to Washington, D.C. to see the wall, my own kids were, I think they were grown. They were high school age, and so we went over there with them, and I had a hard time looking at that wall and not thinking of my own children, because a lot of families, they lost young men who were 18, 19, 17. The youngest one was 16.
Wow. Well, it is sobering to go see that.
Plus, there's some friends whose names are on that wall, and so I went to visit them and make rubbings, and remember who they are or were, and how much potential was lost, because these were fine young men. I mean, the selection process for flight school was very stringent.
It's hard for me to believe that you were so young, charged with so much responsibility, and how young everyone liked flying coppers, that expensive piece of equipment, doing dangerous, heavy-duty work. And
and I look at I watch my kids, especially my son and his buddies when they grew up, and I looked at him and I thought, there's no way we could have been doing what we did when we were that age, because they're chasing girls and drinking beer and having a good time, and doing what young guys do, and we kind of bypassed that part of our life.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for your service.
Well, I am glad that I got the chance to serve.
I feel like you got a piece of advice for young people looking for meaning in their life and what they should do. I feel like a lot of people are searching for what their purpose is, and I feel like you volunteered, but you kind of stumbled into it as well, right?
Yeah.
And it just happened, and it just clicked.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for young people now when they're looking for purpose in their life?
I would say that be careful you don't make too many mistakes, and try to focus on something that's meaningful.
Yeah.
And I'm a deeply spiritual person, and I know I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't even be alive if I didn't have that factor in my life. So that would probably be at the top of my list of things that I would advise young people, to get to know the Lord, to know what the scriptures say, to build their lives around something meaningful. And that will give them some fundamentals to make good decisions.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the interview.
Pleasure to meet you. Tom was right.
Well, thank you.
Amazing stories.
I think I am just so fortunate to be able to do what I did.
It's never really hit me till this, just how the copter is such a utilitarian thing. It's in the service of finding people or rescuing people or putting people in place to find people, and that's pretty cool.
And they were so much fun to fly. My friend, I told you, my friend that has Alzheimer's, he and I had that in common. We just loved to fly, and it keeps your attitude right about going out there every day. Not only do you get to fly, but you get to save lives and to help people and to spend time with some of the best guys in the world. The guys that we flew with, our crew chiefs and the medics, they were the finest.
It also seems to me that you didn't really view it as a chore what you were doing out there, that you were just committed to it, that it had enough parameters to it, that you were always problem solving to make it work, and that the challenge made it not seem like a chore. Would that be true?
Well, I think it's true to an extent, but what took away from that was seeing the wounded every day. Some of the most horrible sights that you couldn't even imagine. The booby traps and the mines, they make the most grievous wounds. The VC and NBA had a booby trap they called the Bouncing Betty. You've probably heard of that. And basically it was set off by a tripwire, and an explosive charge would throw other charges up in the air, and they would go off anywhere from waist to shoulder height, and they were full of nails, and they would put human feces on them, so that it's instant infection.
Yeah.
And it just causes the nastiest wounds. And we looked at that every day. We'd come back, and there'd be blood in the helicopter, and it'd have to be washed out, and it would begin to smell bad, and if it weren't cleaned every day, the crew chief pretty much took care of that. Oh, I got to tell you one more story.
Yeah.
And that is the story of my last mission. I was due to go home in just a few days, and we got called out to an emergency medevac, and this was probably midnight or thereabouts. So we went rushing out there, and Of course, the ground unit told us it was secure LZ and said we'd been under fire and they had gunshot wounds, but everybody was, they figured it was calm now. They said it was calm. So we went ahead and made the approach. Before that mission, the weather had started to get bad, and the primary flight instruments were from the right seat. And I usually flew from the left seat. Most of the aircraft commanders did, but my co-pilot, who was also very good, very competent, and a really good guy, I decided I would switch seats with him anyway. So I went to the right seat, and he went to the left seat. He was not too far from making aircraft commander anyway. He was getting very close. But we got onto the ground, and I had the landing light on for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, just to check out the spot to make sure it was okay. And the enemy had an ambush set up for us, and they knew to wait until we got the power off, because you can tell by the tone of the blades and everything.
Right.
And then they opened up, and I'm sure I saw 3 automatic weapons positions. I don't know what they were, but they just filled us full of holes. So got the all clear from the crew and started to raise up, and they hit us again, and that time I was hit in the lower left leg. It was just really minor. And but because I had a lot of power on, my left foot was way down on the left pedal. So when I got hit in the left leg, my leg snapped, my foot just snapped off the pedal. So we made 2 or 3 circles. And by that time, they had no idea where we were anymore. So we got clear of the LZ, and my friend that was in the other seat, he says, I think I'm hit pretty bad. So I turned on the overhead light, and there was he had been hit right dead center of his right elbow. Left elbow. Left elbow. And he was bleeding all over the place. And the crew, one of them was wounded, but I finally got everything straightened out. And there's 2 little red handles on the back of the pilot seat, and flip those little red handles, and the back of the seat folds down. So finally got him to do that and put a pressure bandage on his wound.
Yeah.
And flew back to the hospital, probably 10 or 15 minutes. And one thing I'll never forget is when we landed, the look of concern on the nurses' faces when they opened the door and started to cut us out. And I told them, I don't need any help. You just have to look after him. And after the other crew member who was hit in the back, who got shot in that kind of a shoulder muscle.
Yeah.
Clean wound. They kept him overnight and let him go. And then I've got pictures the next morning of that helicopter. And fortunately, I landed on the hospital pad and shut it down. And the company commander told me to go get it the next morning. And I didn't want it. I didn't want to. I was like, it's all shot up. Fortunately, it wouldn't start because we'd received at least 1 round through the wiring harnesses in the nose and everything. Nothing was working, so they had to repair it before they brought it home. And that was my last mission. But one other thing I'll show you.
Was that the first time you really, really got shot up out there?
No. We'd been shot at before, but I'd never been hit before.
Yeah. Wow.
And my first feeling was rage.
After you got hit?
Yeah.
Or you mean after it was over?
No, as the moment I was hit.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to get out and shoot somebody. That was my feeling.
Yeah.
Because by that time, I'd seen so much.
Yeah.
That I was ready to shoot somebody anyway.
Yeah.
But
What do you got here?
I carried this map case between the seats, and when we flew, and those were the maps that I used in Vietnam.
Wow.
And that map
for GPS.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that was our GPS. But
Wow.
I didn't even open this case for probably 15 years.
Yeah.
And it was, like I say, it was between the seat, between my co-pilot and I.
Yeah.
And when I opened it up, it's got this crusty brown stuff all over it. And suddenly it occurred to me it was dried blood.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
That set me back a little bit.
Wow. Yeah, I'm surprised how good a shape it's in still.
Yeah, it's never really seen much of the light of day since.
Yeah.
But we carried these maps in the helicopter, and when we got a mission, we just very quickly plot the coordinates. And
Yeah.
that's why it was important to know where you were all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah. And the letter, what is that letter?
That's a letter. A little backstory on that, too. We had gotten a new executive officer just before I left,
Uh-huh.
and he was a second tour guy, had flown gunships his first tour. And he asked me not long before I left, he says, I was looking at your records and I see you don't have a DFC. And no, I don't have one.
What's a DFC?
Distinguished Flying Cross.
Okay.
It got to be where it didn't mean a lot. It was like an attaboy badge.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just told him, no, I don't have one. Well, he says, why not? Didn't you ever do anything to earn one? It really made me mad. You know, because I'd been through all this stuff for a year.
Yeah.
And I had the Special Forces captain that rescued me, you know, that I rescued, and that kissed my sleeve, and the night hoist missions and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
He says, well, I'll tell you what, you just make up a mission and I'll sign it and we'll get you a DFC. I just told him, hell no, I'm not going to do that. How could I be proud of that?
Yeah.
So I didn't.
So what is this then?
That is a letter that the crew, our flying crew members, our crew chiefs and medics, gave to me when I left.
You mind if I read it?
Please do. That means more to me than any medal that they could have pinned on right there.
So it's dated March 31, 69.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ewan, on occasion of your departure from this unit, we wish to express to you our thanks and best wishes. Your outstanding ability to be as an aviator, your courage and integrity have won for you our highest respect. Your personal devotion to duty, your unparalleled concern for the sick and the wounded of Vietnam inspired us, who were not quite so strongly motivated, to try and just hit harder. Try just a bit harder. If artillery clearance was too slow, gunships too far out, or whether IFR, you responded with the same phrase, we can't let them die. And Dustoff 57 was on the deck. How many people must owe their lives to your unselfish actions and unsung heroism? We would like to send you home with a dozen medals, but we cannot. We can send you with our sincerest esteem, our thanks for making us proud to be part of the same Dustoff tradition. We will miss you. And lots of names. That's pretty cool.
It is cool.
It's pretty great.
Yep.
Thank you.
It transcends any kind of a medal that I could have
for
gotten.
sure.
'Cause
That actually means something from people that were in the trenches with
it
you.
means everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that they were willing to fly with me after some of the stupid things that I did. You know?
Well, I can just sit here, from sitting there talking to you, I can see why you were such a great pilot.
Running into a tree and
Trimming trees with the helicopter.
oh yeah.
Well,
But they sat back there and hardly said a word about it, except
Yeah.
I did talk to my crew chief from that mission where I hit the tree.
yeah.
I've been in contact with him since, and that was one of the first things he said, kind of in an accusing way. You destroyed my helicopter.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Pretty cool.
it is.
Thank you.
Well,
Appreciate it.
Thank you for the interview and the time. This is great.
Yeah. That's fun to listen to.
Good.
Very inspiring. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Dude, that's